3 days later, Sarah was preparing to leave the hospital with baby Hope when Detective Rodriguez arrived with news about the investigation. The results were more shocking than anyone had anticipated, and they would change how Sarah understood the danger her daughter had narrowly escaped. "Sarah, we've uncovered extensive information about the organization that targeted you," Detective Rodriguez said as she settled into the visitor's chair. "What we discovered goes far beyond illegal adoption practices." Sarah was packing the few baby items the hospital had provided while Hope slept peacefully in her carrier. The past few days had been filled with meetings with victim advocates, social workers from legitimate agencies, and medical staff who were helping her prepare for life as a new mother. Mrs. Chun and the man calling himself Mr. Henderson are both part of an international trafficking ring that specializes in acquiring newborn babies from vulnerable mothers, the detective explained. They target pregnant teenagers with no family support systems and use fake adoption agencies to obtain infants for sale to buyers overseas. Sarah's hands trembled as she folded tiny blankets. "How many other girls have they done this to?" "We're still investigating, but we've identified at least 12 other young mothers who were approached by Mrs. Chun over the past 2 years, Detective Rodriguez replied. Most of them signed over their babies and received payments that they believed were adoption fees. The magnitude of the criminal operation was staggering. Sarah realized that her daughter had been destined for something far worse than an illegitimate adoption. Hope had been marked for sale to unknown buyers in foreign countries, with no possibility of ever finding her way back to her mother. "What happened to those babies?" Sarah asked, though she dreaded the answer. Detective Rodriguez's expression was grim. "We're working with international law enforcement agencies to trace the network. Some children have been recovered, but others were sold years ago, and their current locations remain unknown." Sarah picked up Hope's carrier and held it protectively. The sleeping baby represented not just her own daughter, but all the infants who had been stolen from their mothers through deception and exploitation. Dr. Williams entered the room carrying Sarah's discharge paperwork. She had been following the investigation's progress and was amazed by both the scope of the criminal operation and Sarah's fortunate escape from it. "Sarah, the victim advocate has arranged temporary housing for you and Hope in a residential program for young mothers," Dr. Williams announced. "You'll have your own apartment, childcare support, and access to educational programs that will help you build a stable future." The transition from planning to give up her baby to preparing for independent motherhood had been overwhelming, but Sarah felt stronger each day. The love she felt for Hope gave her motivation to tackle challenges that had seemed impossible just a week earlier. "Detective Rodriguez, will I have to testify in court against these people?" Sarah asked. "Probably, but you'll have extensive victim support throughout any legal proceedings," the detective assured her. "Your testimony will be crucial in stopping this trafficking ring from targeting other vulnerable young women." Sarah looked down at Hope, who was beginning to stir in her carrier. The thought of facing Mrs. Chun and her accomplices in court was frightening, but Sarah knew that speaking out could protect other babies from the fate Hope had narrowly escaped. "I'll do whatever it takes to stop them," Sarah said firmly. "No other mother should have to go through what I experienced." Dr. Williams completed the discharge paperwork while reviewing infant care instructions with Sarah one final time. The young mother had proven to be attentive and capable during her hospital stay, quickly learning feeding techniques, diaper changing, and recognizing Hope's different cries. "Sarah, you have my direct phone number if any medical concerns arise," Dr. Williams said. "Hope's first pediatric appointment is scheduled for next week, and the residential program has excellent healthcare support for both mothers and babies." A soft knock on the door announced the arrival of Lisa Chun, the victim advocate who would be coordinating Sarah's transition to independent living. Lisa shared the same last name as the criminal social worker, but she represented everything positive that the fake Mrs. Chun had pretended to offer. "Sarah, are you ready to see your new home?" Lisa asked with genuine warmth. "Hope is going to love the nursery we've set up, and you'll be amazed by the support community you're joining." The residential program housed 12 young mothers and their children in a converted apartment complex that provided both privacy and communal support. Each mother had her own living space, but Shared resources included childcare, educational programs, job training, and counseling services. Detective Rodriguez gathered her files and prepared to leave. Sarah, the investigation will continue for several months, but the most dangerous suspects are in custody and can't target any more pregnant women. You should feel proud that your courage in questioning this adoption helped us break up a major trafficking ring. Sarah secured Hope's carrier and gathered their belongings. As they prepared to leave the hospital room where her daughter had been born and their lives had been forever changed, she reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. Dr. Williams, thank you for believing in my instincts when I questioned the adoption, Sarah said. You saved Hope's life by taking my concerns seriously. The doctor smiled as she watched Sarah expertly handle the baby carrier and diaper bag. Sarah, you saved Hope's life by trusting your maternal instincts. I just helped provide the medical setting where you could think clearly and make informed decisions. The ride to the residential facility gave Sarah time to process the dramatic changes in her circumstances. A week ago, she had been a scared, isolated teenager with no support system and no apparent options for providing for her unborn child. Now she was a mother with access to housing, healthcare, educational opportunities, and a community of other young women facing similar challenges. Lisa Chun pointed out community resources as they drove through the neighborhood. Sarah, there's a community college campus 2 blocks from your apartment, and they have excellent childcare facilities for student parents. The residential program includes educational counseling to help you identify career paths that match your interests and abilities. Hope slept peacefully throughout the drive, seeming to sense the security and stability that now surrounded her young life. Sarah marveled at the baby's trust and resilience, qualities that would serve them both well in the months ahead. The residential facility was more welcoming than Sarah had expected. Instead of institutional housing, she saw individual apartments with private entrances and small gardens where children could play safely. Other young mothers were visible around the complex, some pushing strollers, others sitting together while their toddlers played nearby. Sarah, you'll be living in apartment 4B, Lisa explained as they parked near the main office. Your neighbors include 2 other new mothers, and they're excited to meet you and Hope. Sarah's apartment was small but comfortable, with a separate bedroom, full kitchen, living area, and bathroom. The nursery had been thoughtfully prepared with a crib, changing table, rocking chair, and shelves stocked with baby supplies donated by community organizations. This is really ours, Sarah asked in amazement. I can't believe how beautiful everything looks. Lisa smiled as she helped Sarah settle Hope into the new crib. The apartment is yours for as long as you need it while you complete education or job training. Most mothers stay between 18 months and 3 years, depending on their goals and progress. Hope woke up and began fussing, reminding Sarah that feeding time was approaching. As she prepared to nurse her daughter in the comfortable rocking chair, Sarah felt overwhelmed by gratitude for the support systems she had discovered. Lisa, what would have happened to girls like me before programs like this existed? Sarah asked. Too many young mothers ended up in dangerous situations because they had nowhere else to turn, Lisa replied honestly. Programs like this exist specifically to provide safe alternatives for vulnerable women who want to keep their children. Over the next several hours, Sarah met her neighbors and began learning about the community she was joining. Maria was 19 with a 6-month-old son, and she was completing a nursing program while living at the facility. Jennifer was 21 with twin daughters, and she had just graduated with a business degree and secured a marketing position that would allow her to move to independent housing. Sarah, the first few months are the hardest, Maria explained as they sat together in the community room while their babies played on blankets nearby. But once you get into a routine with childcare and classes, everything becomes more manageable. Jennifer nodded in agreement. The program gives you time to figure out what you want to do with your life, while making sure your baby has everything she needs. I couldn't have succeeded without this support. That evening, as Sarah gave Hope her bedtime feeding in their own apartment, she thought about the incredible journey that had brought them to this safe, hopeful place. The criminal investigation would continue, and Sarah would have to face difficult court testimony. But the immediate crisis was over. Hope fell asleep in Sarah's arms, and The young mother took time to really study her daughter's face in the soft nursery light. The baby's features were becoming more defined each day, and Sarah could see hints of her own bone structure in Hope's tiny face. "We're going to be okay, little one," Sarah whispered. "Mama's going to work really hard to give you the best life possible." A gentle knock on the apartment door interrupted the quiet moment. Lisa Chun had stopped by to check on their first evening and bring Sarah some additional resources about the programs available through the facility. "How does it feel to be home?" Lisa asked as she settled into the living room chair. Sarah looked around the small apartment that represented security and possibilities she had never imagined. "It feels like the beginning of our real life together. Hope and I are finally safe, and we have a chance to build something good." Lisa smiled as she watched Sarah expertly handle new motherhood tasks. "Sarah, you've shown incredible strength throughout this crisis. Hope is lucky to have a mother who was willing to fight for her safety." The next morning brought Sarah's first experience with the facility's childcare program while she met with educational counselors to discuss her academic goals. Hope settled easily with the experienced childcare providers, allowing Sarah to focus on planning her educational future. "Sarah, your high school transcripts show strong performance in science and math," the educational counselor observed. "Have you ever considered healthcare careers? The community college has excellent programs in nursing, medical technology, and physical therapy." Sarah had never imagined that college might be possible for someone in her situation. "I always liked helping people, but I thought I wasn't smart enough for healthcare careers." "Your academic record suggests otherwise," the counselor replied. "And single mothers often make excellent healthcare professionals because they understand the importance of caring for vulnerable people." By the end of her first week at the residential facility, Sarah had enrolled in prerequisites for the nursing program and established a routine that balanced Hope's needs with her educational goals. The baby was thriving in the supportive environment, and Sarah was gaining confidence in her abilities as both a mother and a student. Detective Rodriguez visited with updates on the criminal case. Mrs. Chun and her accomplices were facing federal trafficking charges, and the investigation had identified victims in multiple states. Sarah's testimony would be crucial, but the detective assured her that extensive victim support services would be available throughout the legal process. "Sarah, breaking up this trafficking ring will protect countless other young mothers and babies," Detective Rodriguez explained. "Your courage in questioning the adoption and your willingness to testify are making a real difference in fighting these crimes." 6 months later, Sarah was thriving in her nursing prerequisites while Hope grew into a happy, healthy baby who charmed everyone at the residential facility. The criminal trial had resulted in lengthy prison sentences for the trafficking ring members, and Sarah's testimony had been instrumental in securing convictions. Dr. Williams visited occasionally to check on both mother and baby's progress. She was amazed by Sarah's transformation from a scared teenager into a confident young woman pursuing ambitious educational goals while providing excellent care for her daughter. "Sarah, watching you and Hope thrive has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my medical career," Dr. Williams said during one visit. "You've proven that young mothers can succeed when they have proper support and opportunities." Sarah looked down at Hope, who was now sitting up and playing with colorful toys. The baby's bright eyes and curious expression reminded Sarah daily of why she had fought so hard to protect this precious child. "Dr. Williams, thank you for seeing what I couldn't see at the time," Sarah said. "You helped me trust my instincts when I was too scared and overwhelmed to think clearly." The doctor smiled as she watched Hope clap her hands and babble happily. "Sarah, you saved Hope's life by questioning something that felt wrong. Never underestimate the power of a mother's protective instincts." As Sarah prepared for her second year of nursing prerequisites, she often reflected on the dramatic events that had brought her and Hope to their current stable, hopeful situation. The criminal investigation had revealed the full scope of the danger Hope had faced, but it had also connected Sarah with resources and opportunities she had never known existed. Hope's first birthday was celebrated with the community of young mothers who had become Sarah's extended family. The baby who had nearly been sold to international traffickers was now a bright, healthy toddler surrounded by love and security. "Happy birthday, sweet Hope," Sarah said as she helped her daughter blow out her first birthday candle. Mama loves you more than all the stars in the sky. The residential program had given Sarah and Hope the foundation they needed to build a bright future together. Sarah was succeeding academically, Hope was thriving developmentally, and both mother and daughter were surrounded by supportive community relationships. Looking back on the terrifying hours after Hope's birth, Sarah marveled at how dramatically their circumstances had changed. The scared teenager who had nearly given up her baby was gone, replaced by a strong young woman pursuing her dreams while raising a beloved daughter. The trafficking ring that had targeted them was destroyed, its members serving prison sentences that would prevent them from exploiting other vulnerable women. Sarah's courage in questioning the suspicious adoption had not only saved Hope, but had protected countless other babies from similar fates. As Hope took her first wobbly steps across their apartment living room, Sarah felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment of joy and possibility. Their future was bright with promise, built on the foundation of a mother's love and the support of a community that believed in second chances. Detective Maria Rodriguez arrived at the hospital within 30 minutes of Dr. Williams' emergency call. She had spent 12 years investigating human trafficking cases, and the details she received from hospital security immediately raised serious concerns. A newborn baby, an isolated teenage mother, suspicious financial arrangements, and pressure tactics all pointed towards something much darker than a legitimate adoption. Sarah was nursing her daughter when Detective Rodriguez knocked gently on the hospital room door. Dr. Williams made introductions while the baby continued feeding peacefully, seemingly unaware of the crisis surrounding her young life. "Sarah, I need to ask you some detailed questions about Mrs. Chun and this adoption agency," Detective Rodriguez said as she pulled out a notebook. "But first, I want you to know that you and your baby are completely safe here. Hospital security has been increased, and we've placed holds on any attempts to remove the infant from the premises." Relief washed over Sarah's face. "Detective, I've been thinking about everything that happened over the past few months, and so many things seem wrong now. But at the time, I was scared and desperate, and Mrs. Chin seemed like she was really trying to help me." Detective Rodriguez had seen this pattern many times before. Predators who targeted vulnerable young women often presented themselves as helpful advocates while gradually isolating their victims from support systems and legitimate resources. "Tell me about your first contact with Mrs. Chun," the detective requested. "How did you meet her?" Sarah shifted the baby to her shoulder for burping while she organized her memories. "I was living at Riverside Group Home for aged-out foster kids. When I found out I was pregnant, the house supervisor said I couldn't stay there with a baby. She gave me Mrs. Chen's card and said this social worker specialized in helping young mothers find good families for their babies." Dr. Williams frowned at this information. "Sarah, did anyone from the group home connect you with prenatal care or counseling services?" "Mrs. Chen handled everything," Sarah replied. "She found this clinic that provided free medical care and said she would take care of all the arrangements. She told me not to worry about anything except staying healthy." Detective Rodriguez was taking detailed notes. In legitimate support systems, pregnant teenagers would be connected with multiple resources and advocates, not isolated with a single point of contact who controlled all aspects of their care. "What kind of information did Mrs. Chun collect from you?" the detective asked. Sarah thought carefully. She wanted to know everything about my family background, medical history, and education level. She asked a lot of questions about whether I had any relatives who might want to raise the baby. When I told her I was completely alone, she seemed almost relieved. The detective's suspicions were growing stronger. Legitimate adoption agencies worked hard to explore family placement options before considering stranger adoption. Mrs. Chin's behavior suggested she specifically targeted isolated young women with no family support systems. "Sarah, did Mrs. Chin ever mention the names of other adoption agencies or give you options to compare?" Dr. Williams asked. "No," Sarah realized with growing alarm. She said her agency was the best in the region and that other organizations couldn't provide the same level of service. She told me that shopping around would just confuse me and delay finding the perfect family. Detective Rodriguez had heard this isolation tactic many times before. "What about the medical clinic she arranged? Did you ever see bills or insurance documentation? Sarah shook her head. Mrs. Chen said everything was being handled directly with the adoptive family's insurance. She told me not to worry about paperwork because it would just stress me out unnecessarily. Dr. Williams was becoming increasingly concerned about the prenatal care Sarah had received. Sarah, what kind of medical monitoring did they provide? Did you have regular ultrasounds and checkups? The appointments were really basic, Sarah admitted. They checked my weight and blood pressure, but I only had 2 ultrasounds during the whole pregnancy. Mrs. Chin said too many tests were expensive and unnecessary for a healthy young woman. The detective and doctor exchanged worried glances. Proper prenatal care included regular monitoring and multiple ultrasounds to ensure both mother and baby remained healthy throughout pregnancy. The minimal care Sarah described suggested a focus on keeping her just healthy enough to deliver a live infant, not comprehensive medical support. Tell me about the financial arrangements, Detective Rodriguez continued. When did money first come up in your conversations? Sarah was beginning to recognize patterns that had seemed normal at the time, but now felt sinister. At first, Mrs. Chun said the adoptive family would just cover medical expenses and maybe help with some living costs. But as my due date got closer, she started mentioning larger amounts. Last week, she said I would receive $50,000. Dr. Williams nearly dropped her pen. Sarah, did she explain why the payment had increased so dramatically? She said the adoptive family was so grateful to find me that they wanted to make sure I could get a fresh start in life, Sarah explained. But when I asked for details about where the money was coming from, she got upset and said I shouldn't question their generosity. Detective Rodriguez knew from experience that legitimate adoption expenses rarely exceeded $10,000, even in complex cases. $50,000 suggested either wealthy adoptive parents with questionable motives or something much more sinister than a normal family adoption. Sarah, did Mrs. Chen ever show you photos of the adoptive family or share details about their background? The detective asked. She said they valued privacy and preferred to remain anonymous until after the adoption was finalized, Sarah replied. She described them as a wealthy professional couple who had been trying to have children for years, but I never saw pictures or learned their real names. Dr. Williams was taking notes of her own now. In legitimate adoptions, birth mothers typically have significant input into family selection and often meet prospective parents multiple times before making final decisions. The baby had finished nursing and fallen asleep in Sarah's arms. Looking down at her peaceful daughter, Sarah felt a surge of protective anger at the people who had tried to manipulate her into giving up this precious child. Detective Rodriguez, what do you think was really happening? Sarah asked. Were they planning to hurt my baby? The detective chose her words carefully. Sarah, we're still investigating, but the financial arrangements and pressure tactics suggest this wasn't a legitimate adoption. We need to find out who these people really are and what they intended to do with your daughter. A soft knock on the door interrupted their conversation. Hospital security announced that the police had Mrs. Chun in custody for questioning, and they had also detained the man who claimed to be Mr. Henderson. Both individuals were being held pending investigation of their credentials and backgrounds. That's good news, Dr. Williams said. Sarah, this means you have time to make informed decisions about your daughter's future without pressure from anyone. Sarah looked down at her sleeping baby and felt overwhelmed by the magnitude of what had nearly happened. I can't believe I almost gave her to those people. What if Dr. Williams hadn't questioned their behavior? Detective Rodriguez had seen too many cases where vulnerable young women weren't as fortunate as Sarah. The important thing is that you trusted your instincts when something felt wrong. Your daughter is safe because you were brave enough to ask questions. Over the next hour, Detective Rodriguez gathered detailed information about every interaction Sarah had experienced with Mrs. Chun and the supposed adoption agency. She also arranged for Sarah to meet with a victim advocate who specialized in helping young mothers navigate complex legal and social service systems. Sarah, while we investigate this situation, you're going to need support in making real decisions about your daughter's future, the detective explained. The victim advocate will connect you with legitimate resources including housing assistance, childcare support, educational opportunities, and, if you do want to consider adoption, properly licensed agencies. Sarah felt both scared and relieved. For months, She had believed she had no options except the arrangement Mrs. Chun had presented. Now she was learning that young mothers had access to extensive support systems designed to help them make informed choices. "What about the people who tried to take my baby?" Sarah asked. "What will happen to them?" "That depends on what our investigation reveals," Detective Rodriguez replied. "At minimum, they were operating an unlicensed adoption agency and using deceptive practices. But if this is part of a larger trafficking operation, they could face federal charges." Dr. Williams had been quietly observing the conversation while monitoring both Sarah and the baby's medical condition. Both mother and child were healthy and stable, but the emotional trauma of the situation would require ongoing support. "Sarah, I want you to know that you've shown incredible strength today," Dr. Williams said. "Making the decision to question this adoption took real courage, and your daughter is lucky to have a mother who puts her safety first." The baby stirred in Sarah's arms and opened her dark blue eyes briefly before settling back into sleep. In that moment, Sarah felt the full weight of her responsibility and the fierce love that came with motherhood. "I want to try to raise her myself," Sarah said quietly. "I know it won't be easy, but I can't imagine giving her to strangers now. She's my daughter, and I want to be her mother." Detective Rodriguez smiled for the first time since arriving at the hospital. "Sarah, there are programs specifically designed to help young mothers succeed. You'll have access to housing assistance, childcare support while you complete education or job training, medical care, and ongoing counseling services." Sarah had never imagined that such resources existed. Mrs. Chun had convinced her that keeping the baby would mean a life of poverty and struggle for both mother and child. Learning about legitimate support systems was changing everything about how she viewed her options. "What happens next?" Sarah asked. "First, we complete our investigation and make sure these people can't target other vulnerable women," Detective Rodriguez explained. "Then, you work with the victim advocate to develop a plan for your future that includes whatever support you need to care for your daughter safely." Dr. Williams checked her watch and noted that Sarah had been awake for nearly 24 hours. "Sarah, you need rest to recover from delivery and process everything that's happened. The baby will need regular feeding, and you both need time to bond without outside pressure." The detective gathered her notes and prepared to leave. "Sarah, I'll be in touch tomorrow with updates on our investigation. A victim advocate will visit you in the morning to discuss immediate needs like safe housing and ongoing support services." After Detective Rodriguez left, the hospital room felt peaceful for the first time since the baby's birth. Sarah looked down at her sleeping daughter and marveled at how much her life had changed in just a few hours. "Dr. Williams, thank you for protecting us," Sarah said softly. "If you hadn't questioned Mrs. Chin's behavior, I don't know what would have happened." The doctor pulled her chair closer to Sarah's bed. "Sarah, you protected your daughter by trusting your instincts when something felt wrong. Never doubt that your love and concern make you a good mother." Sarah gently touched her daughter's tiny hand and felt the baby's fingers curl around her own. The connection was immediate and powerful, confirming what her heart had been telling her all along. This child belonged with her, and she would do whatever it took to provide a loving, safe home. "What should I name her?" Sarah asked, realizing that she had avoided thinking about names while planning to give the baby up for adoption. Dr. Williams smiled. "What name feels right to you?" Sarah studied her daughter's peaceful face. "Hope," she said finally. "I want to name her Hope because she represents a new beginning for both of us." The doctor made a note in the medical records. "Hope Martinez. It's a beautiful name for a brave little girl with an even braver mother." As Sarah settled back into the hospital bed with baby Hope sleeping peacefully in her arms, she felt a sense of purpose and determination that surprised her with its strength. The scared, isolated teenager was gone, replaced by a young woman ready to fight for her daughter's future. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but Sarah was no longer facing them alone. She had a daughter who needed her protection and love, and she had discovered that support systems existed for young mothers willing to work hard for their children's welfare. The criminal investigation would continue, but Sarah's focus was shifting toward building a future with hope. For the first time in years, she felt truly hopeful about what lay ahead. Her daughter had given her a purpose worth fighting for, and Sarah was ready to prove that love and determination could overcome any obstacle. The hospital room felt cold despite the summer heat outside. Sarah Martinez gripped the metal bed rails as another wave of pain coursed through her body. At 19 years old, she never imagined her life would lead to this moment. The baby inside her kicked restlessly, as if sensing the uncertainty that surrounded them both. Dr. Patricia Williams adjusted her surgical gloves and checked the monitors one final time. Sarah had been in labor for nearly 18 hours, and complications were mounting. The young woman's blood pressure readings concerned the medical team, and the baby's heart rate had become irregular during the last hour. "Sarah, I need you to focus on your breathing," Dr. Williams said gently. "We're going to help you through this." Sarah's eyes darted around the sterile room. No family members sat beside her bed. No partner held her hand. The social worker, Mrs. Chun, stood quietly in the corner with a clipboard and a sympathetic expression that Sarah had learned to distrust over the past several months. The contractions intensified, and Sarah found herself thinking about the conversation that had brought her to this place. 6 months earlier, she had discovered her pregnancy while living in a group home for troubled youth. The father was nowhere to be found, and her own family had disowned her years before when she aged out of the foster care system. Mrs. Chun had presented what seemed like the only viable option. A wealthy family from California wanted to adopt a newborn. They would cover all medical expenses and provide Sarah with a small sum of money to help her get back on her feet. The paperwork had been signed months ago, with Sarah's shaky signature appearing on multiple documents she barely understood. "The baby is coming," Dr. Williams announced. "Sarah, when I tell you to push, give me everything you have." Sarah closed her eyes and summoned strength she didn't know she possessed. Through the pain and exhaustion, she felt a fierce protective instinct awakening within her. This tiny person she had carried for 9 months was about to enter a world that had shown Sarah little kindness. 20 minutes later, a baby girl's cry filled the room. Dr. Williams quickly cleaned the infant and performed the necessary medical checks while Sarah lay back against the pillows, physically and emotionally drained. "She's beautiful," the doctor said softly, wrapping the baby in a pink blanket. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and healthy lungs. Sarah reached out instinctively, but Mrs. Chun stepped forward with practiced efficiency. "The adoptive parents are waiting in the family room," she announced. "Dr. Williams, please prepare the infant for transfer." Something cold settled in Sarah's stomach. In all the months of preparation, she had somehow convinced herself that she would have more time, that she would get to hold her daughter, to look into her eyes, to say goodbye properly. "Wait," Sarah whispered, then louder, "Wait. I want to hold her first." Mrs. Chin consulted her clipboard. "Sarah, we discussed this. The sooner the transition happens, the easier it will be for everyone involved. The adoptive parents have been waiting for hours." Dr. Williams glanced between the two women, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. She had delivered hundreds of babies, but adoption cases always carried an emotional weight that made her question aspects of her profession. "Just for a minute," Sarah pleaded. "Please." The social worker's expression remained neutral, but she nodded briefly. Dr. Williams placed the baby in Sarah's arms, and time seemed to freeze. The infant's eyes were dark blue, still adjusting to the bright lights of the world outside the womb. Her tiny fingers were perfectly formed, and Sarah marveled at the delicate fingernails that had somehow developed during their months together. The baby seemed to study Sarah's face with an intensity that broke the young mother's heart. "Hello, little one," Sarah whispered. "I'm sorry our time together has to be so short." Mrs. Chun cleared her throat. "Sarah, we really need to complete the transfer. The Hendersons have a flight back to California this evening." Sarah's grip on the baby tightened involuntarily. Something about Mrs. Chin's businesslike tone and the rushed timeline felt wrong. During their previous meetings, the social worker had spoken about transition periods and gradual adjustments. Now everything seemed to be happening with an urgency that made Sarah's maternal instincts scream in alarm. "Who exactly are the Hendersons?" Sarah asked. "I want to meet them first." Mrs. Chin's professional smile faltered slightly. "That wasn't part of our agreement. Anonymous adoption protects all parties involved." Dr. Williams had been listening to this exchange while completing her post-delivery paperwork, but something in Mrs. Chin's manner was raising red flags. In her 15 years of practice, she had worked with many adoption agencies and social workers. The good ones always prioritized the birth mother's emotional well-being and ensured proper procedures were followed. Sarah has the right to change her mind, Dr. Williams said carefully. Until the legal waiting period expires, the birth mother retains full parental rights. Mrs. Chin's clipboard snapped shut with an audible click. Dr. Williams, I appreciate your concern, but this is a private adoption arranged through licensed agencies. All paperwork has been filed correctly with the state. The baby began to fuss in Sarah's arms, and she instinctively began rocking gently. The natural motion seemed to calm both mother and child, but it also strengthened Sarah's growing reluctance to let go. I want to see the adoption papers again, Sarah said. And I want to meet these people who are taking my daughter. Mrs. Chin's professional mask was beginning to slip. Sarah, you're experiencing normal postpartum emotions. This is why we handle transfers immediately. The longer you delay, the more difficult this becomes for everyone. Dr. Williams had seen enough adoption cases to know that legitimate agencies encouraged birth mothers to take their time and make informed decisions. The pressure tactics being employed by Mrs. Chun were definitely not standard protocol. I'm going to need to see your agency credentials, Dr. Williams said firmly. And, Sarah, you don't have to make any decisions right now. You can take time to recover and think clearly. The social worker's face flushed with irritation. This is highly irregular. The Hendersons have traveled across the country and made significant financial commitments based on this arrangement. Sarah's confusion was growing by the minute. The woman who had seemed so caring and supportive during their previous meetings was now acting like a completely different person. The emphasis on money and rushed timelines was making her question everything about this adoption. Where exactly are these people? Sarah asked. If they're really here to adopt my baby, why can't I see them? Mrs. Chin glanced at her watch with obvious agitation. They're handling final paperwork in the business office. Sarah, every minute you delay is costing them money and causing unnecessary complications. Dr. Williams moved closer to Sarah's bed. Something about this entire situation was triggering her protective instincts. In legitimate adoptions, birth mothers were encouraged to take time, ask questions, and feel completely comfortable with their decisions. The pressure being applied here felt more like a sales transaction than a life-changing family decision. The baby had fallen asleep in Sarah's arms, her tiny chest rising and falling with perfect regularity. Sarah found herself memorizing every detail of her daughter's face, knowing that these might be the only moments they would ever share. Dr. Williams, Sarah said quietly, what happens if I change my mind right now? The question seemed to electrify Mrs. Chun. Sarah, you can't change your mind. Contracts have been signed. Money has changed hands. The Hendersons have already made arrangements for childcare and prepared a nursery. But Dr. Williams was looking at the social worker with growing suspicion. Actually, Sarah has full parental rights until the legal waiting period expires. That's typically 72 hours in this state. Mrs. Chin's professional composure finally cracked completely. This is ridiculous. Do you have any idea what kind of life you can provide for this child? You're 19 years old with no family support, no education, and no financial resources. The Hendersons can give her everything she needs. The harsh words hit Sarah like physical blows, but they also clarified something important. This wasn't about what was best for the baby. This felt like a business transaction where Sarah was being treated as nothing more than a supplier of merchandise. Dr. Williams had heard enough. Mrs. Chun, I'm going to need you to step outside while I complete my patient care. Sarah needs time to recover from delivery before making any major decisions. The social worker's eyes flashed with anger. You're interfering with a legal adoption process. I'll have to report this to my supervisors. Please do, Dr. Williams replied calmly. And, while you're at it, please provide documentation of your agency's license and credentials. I'll need that for my records. Mrs. Chun gathered her clipboard and headed for the door. I'll be back in 1 hour with the proper paperwork and the adoptive parents. Sarah, I strongly advise you not to complicate this situation any further. After the door closed, the hospital room felt peaceful for the first time since Sarah's arrival. The baby continued sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms, oblivious to the drama surrounding her future. Dr. Williams, Sarah said softly, something doesn't feel right about this whole thing. The doctor pulled a chair close to Sarah's bed. Tell me what's been bothering you. Sarah organized her thoughts carefully. When I first met Mrs. Chun, she talked about helping me find the perfect family for my baby. She said I would have input into the selection process and could meet potential parents. But as the months went on, everything became more secretive. She said the adoptive parents wanted complete privacy and that meeting them would complicate the emotional aspects. Dr. Williams nodded encouragingly. What else concerns you? The money, Sarah continued. At first, she said the adoptive parents would cover medical expenses and provide a small amount to help me transition to independent living. But last week, she mentioned a much larger sum. When I asked about it, she got evasive and said financial details were confidential. The doctor's expression grew more serious. Sarah, how much money are we talking about? She mentioned $50,000, Sarah whispered. She said it was for medical expenses and compensation for my time, but that seemed like way too much money for a normal adoption. Dr. Williams felt her stomach drop. $50,000 was far beyond reasonable expenses for a routine adoption. Combined with the pressure tactics and secrecy, this situation was beginning to look like something much more sinister than a legitimate family placement. Sarah, I want you to know that you have options, Dr. Williams said carefully. You can take time to investigate this adoption agency. You can request to meet the adoptive parents. You can ask for detailed documentation of where the money is coming from. And you can change your mind completely if something doesn't feel right. The baby stirred in Sarah's arms and opened her eyes briefly before settling back into sleep. In that moment, Sarah felt the full weight of her responsibility as this child's mother and protector. What if Mrs. Chun is right, though? Sarah asked. What if I can't provide the kind of life my daughter deserves? Dr. Williams had counseled many young mothers facing similar decisions. Sarah, being a good parent isn't about having money or a perfect life situation. It's about love, commitment, and putting your child's welfare first. Those are things you can provide regardless of your age or financial situation. A knock on the door interrupted their conversation. A nurse peeked inside and announced that someone named Mr. Henderson was asking to speak with Sarah immediately. Sarah and Dr. Williams exchanged glances. If the adoptive father was really here to complete a legitimate adoption, why was he demanding immediate access instead of working through proper channels? Tell him that I'm with my patient and can't be disturbed, Dr. Williams instructed the nurse. If he wants to schedule a meeting, he can work with the hospital's patient advocate. After the nurse left, Dr. Williams turned back to Sarah. I think we need to involve hospital security and possibly contact law enforcement. This situation has too many red flags to ignore. Sarah's heart was racing, but holding her daughter gave her strength. Dr. Williams, what if this isn't a real adoption at all? What if something terrible is happening? The doctor's expression was grim. That's exactly what I'm worried about. Sarah, I want you to know that whatever happens, you and your baby are safe here. Hospital security is excellent, and we're not going to let anyone pressure you into decisions you're not comfortable making. The baby began to wake up, and Sarah adjusted her position to make the infant more comfortable. As she did, she noticed something that made her blood run cold. Through the small window in the hospital room door, she could see a man in an expensive suit talking animatedly with Mrs. Chun in the hallway. But instead of looking like a nervous prospective father, he appeared angry and impatient. Dr. Williams, Sarah whispered, I think we need to call the police right now. The doctor followed Sarah's gaze and saw the same troubling scene. The man's body language was aggressive, and Mrs. Chun kept glancing towards Sarah's room with obvious anxiety. This looked nothing like a joyful adoption celebration. Dr. Williams reached for the bedside phone. Sarah, I'm going to call hospital security and the police. Something is definitely not right here. As the doctor made the emergency calls, Sarah held her daughter closer and made a silent promise. Whatever was happening, she would not let anyone harm this innocent child. The maternal instincts she had tried to suppress for months were now fully awakened, and she was prepared to fight for her daughter's safety. Outside in the hallway, the conversation between Mrs. Chun and the mysterious Mr. Henderson was becoming more heated. Through the glass, Sarah could see the man pointing toward her room and checking his watch repeatedly. Mrs. Chun kept shaking her head and gesturing with obvious distress. Within minutes, two security guards appeared in the hallway and approached the arguing pair. Mr. Henderson immediately became defensive, but Mrs. Chen seemed relieved by their intervention. The security guards spoke briefly with both individuals before escorting them away from the maternity ward. Dr. Williams hung up the phone and returned to Sarah's side. Security is handling the situation in the hallway, and police are on their way. Sarah, I want you to know that you've made the right choice by questioning this adoption. Your instincts as a mother are protecting your daughter. Sarah looked down at the sleeping baby and felt a surge of fierce love and determination. Whatever challenges lay ahead, she knew she would face them as this child's mother and protector. The rushed adoption that had seemed like her only option was beginning to look like a dangerous trap, and she was grateful for the medical professional who had helped her recognize the warning signs. The next few hours would bring answers, but Sarah already knew the most important truth. She was this baby's mother, and no amount of money or pressure would make her abandon that responsibility. The scared teenager who had signed adoption papers months ago was gone, replaced by a young woman who was ready to fight for her daughter's future. Hospital security had secured the maternity ward, and police investigators were already beginning their inquiry into the suspicious adoption agency. Sarah didn't know what the investigation would reveal, but she knew her daughter was safe for now. That was enough to help her find the strength to face whatever came next.